everyone, it's Kim. I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about counseling with the Indigenous Americans, and I'm going to try to share two of the biggest challenges that this group faces, and a counseling approach that works well, and some of the barriers that can make it harder to seek help, along with ways that we can reduce those barriers. So here we go. We're going to have some fun. I'm just kidding. Anyway, two of the issues that are facing the Indigenous Americans would be first the mental health and historical trauma. I think one of the biggest challenges in the high rate of, is the high rate of mental health struggles, things like depression, PTSD, substance abuse, and especially suicide among Native youth. Researchers like Steinsick and colleagues in 2025, they pointed out that these rates are far above the US average. And a lot of this connects back to what we call the historical trauma, the ongoing effects of colonization, the boarding schools and the forced assimilation. I think it was Old Danny and Proza in 2021, they explained that these collective wounds continue to affect families and communities today. The second issue would be the poverty and the structural barriers. If I was to point one out, the second challenge is the economic and social inequality. Many of the indigenous communities face higher poverty rates, they face higher unemployment and limited access to good schools or healthcare. If you think about it, living in these rural or reservation areas also makes it harder to reach mental health providers. And I think it was John Henderson and colleagues, 2023, they describe how these structural disadvantages stack up, creating stress and health problems that affect both the body and the mind. You know, a counseling approach would, so what counseling approach works best? I believe that in this case, a trauma-informed and culturally centered model is the right fit. Um, Being trauma informed means creating safety, trust, and empowerment, and recognizing this deep impact of historical trauma. I think, with a culturally centered model, we don't just apply, the US or the Western idea of mental health. We listen to the indigenous and their view, and which is often seen as see healing as a community or a spiritual a process. The narrative therapy also fits well here, because storytelling is an important tradition with with the indigenous, and I think it lets clients retell their own stories and reclaim their own identities in a positive way. I think, and if you go back to like Sue and Sue 2022, they remind us in our textbook, cultural humility and advocacy are key. And we have to respect the client's worldview and against these systemic behaviors. I think if we could go to a third point, the cultural barriers and how we need to reduce these. I- you know, of course, there are barriers that make it harder for the indigenous clients to seek counseling. First, there's mistrust. Given the history of broken treaties and harmful government programs, many people don't trust mainstream institutions. Second, many prefer traditional healers or ceremonies instead of professional counseling. Third, I think access itself can be tough. Distance, lack of transportation, or not enough providers in rural areas. So, how can we, as counselors, help reduce these barriers? I think first we can practice humility. I think that that's the first thing, being open to learn and showing respect for the indigenous values. We can partner with communities and elders and make space for traditional healing practices alongside counseling. We can bring services closer through community programs, telehealth, or outreach clinics, and we can advocate more for the indigenous counselors. I think so, clients have providers who truly understand their background, if that makes sense. So indigenous Americans, they do face these serious challenges tied to historical trauma and structural inequality. And a trauma informed, culturally centered counseling model that integrates the storytelling and advocacy can really make a difference. But I think to be effective, we have to first build trust, respect to their traditions, and remove the barriers to care. All right. Thank you for listening. My references are Steinsick et al. 2025. It was the Mental Health Care for American Indian and Alaska Native Populations Psychiatric Services. The second one is Oldani and Prosen 2021. Trauma Informed Care for Native American Patients and Community Prioritizing Health, Not Management. And then John Henderson et al. It's Physical Health Disparities Among American Indians and Alaska Natives. And then Sue and Sue, Counseling the Culturally Diverse Theory and Practice, ninth edition. Take care. Thank you.